I now recognize Dr. McCormick from Georgia for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you for this opportunity to talk about this very important topic. I think it was somewhat hilarious that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about how we've politicized this and used this to dupe the American public that you're not doing your job, and then spend most of their time on their points talking about anything but COVID, as if they're not politicizing this very topic. Today's hearing not only highlights the Department of Health and Human Services' blatant non-compliance, but also brings to attention something much larger, and that's that we believe that bureaucracies now have more power than the people themselves. In our doctor's caucus, we had the secretary come before us and could not answer questions because he was in legal hearings. Now, I want to point out the fact that he actually lost those legal hearings on the Surprise Act, which he has stonewalled a lot of people on and taken sides on, in my opinion. And I think it's probably an insult to the people that we picked a lawyer who loses his law cases as the head of Health and Human Services. That's just my opinion. But I think we have an overgrown, unacceptable, and unaccountable bureaucracy right now. You mentioned that we're overtaxed in this department, but you also, in the same breath, mentioned you have 90,000 employees. 90,000 employees. There's 435 congressmen who ask questions, and we have 90,000 employees that don't put priorities on giving the questions that we're asking specifically from this department. If that's not your priority, I don't know what is. When we have a congressional investigation, it's not merely a burdensome task when we ask a bureaucracy a question. It is your priority. 90,000 employees getting a question back to, I would assume less than half of Congress ask questions specifically. 90,000 employees employed with a very large budget for one reason: to be accountable to people. We are the people.
So, Congressman.
So wait, I haven't asked a question yet. Thank you. I think Congress needs to kind of take our power back. I will ask you a question here in a second. When I believe that you haven't answered the specific questions, you've answered questions, you've given us a ton of information, just not specific to what the chairman has asked specifically. I've seen the chairman get more upset today than I've seen in a very long time. He's a pretty mellow-mannered guy. But I feel like there's been this slow rolling of information and avoiding. So I'll ask you a couple questions I'll allow you to answer. The first one, yes or no, if you please. Has anyone in the Department of Health and Human Services ever told you or implied that you should not comply with our specific investigation questions?
No, we've always worked to accommodate.
Okay. Then how do you explain when the agency doesn't comply with a specific request on a specific question with those 90,000 employees working in compliance with our specific request for information?
So, Congressman, I want to speak to the 90,000 employees, then I will answer your question. Those 90,000 employees serve all of the functions of HHS.
I understand.
So that makes sure that 64 million Americans have Medicare coverage.
Yep.
That we're partnering with 51 states and 50 states, DC, and territories for Medicaid. That we're making sure we're training medical students and paying for graduate medical education.
How many people are on your staff?
Congressman, the Assistant Secretary for Legislation has a staff of approximately 27 that serve all of the functions, including letting you know about the grants.
So 27 employees that specifically answer to you, and you specifically answer to the Secretary, and the Secretary specifically answers to us. Okay, thank you. And I'm sure they're very qualified individuals. I'm sure the people sitting behind you have lots of answers to our specific questions, and that's our frustration right now. Congress and federal agencies are supposed to serve the American people, and this is what frustrates us when we don't get answers. I'm running short on time, but I'm going to say, do you believe that you've upheld the duties and provided the answers specifically that we've asked, the specific questions we've asked that the chair pointed out at the beginning of this? Do you think you've answered those?
Congressman, we have responded to the priorities.
Okay, I disagree. I think you've responded, but not to the specific questions. So this is the non-compliance that we're frustrated with, all of us here. I think it sends a message not only about HHS, but also about the Biden administration in general, that we don't have the accountability we want. I don't think we can ignore Congress's direct questioning. If you can't provide these answers to Congress with your staff, which I think is very well funded, specifically to answer questions for us, then that kind of leads me to believe that either you can't justify your budget, or because you're either duplicitous, because you're supplying stuff that we can get anywhere else besides your department, or you're just not being honest. And that's what disturbs us, and that's what I wanted to address with our time. I think you guys need to answer some very specific questions very quickly, or there's going to be a bigger problem. With that, I yield.